This is the story of how a law passed to stop school kids getting high helped create death and chaos in the British prison system. There was a time when any would-be teenage hedonists could take their first tentative steps towards narcotic oblivion right here on the British High Street. There were once hundreds of so-called head shops up and down the United Kingdom, independent fiefdoms selling a strange array of countercultural paraphernalia, some of which could even get you mildly high for a few seconds. And in 2008, it was there, amid the giant bongs, fairy orbs, comedy sex toys, and Bob Marley posters, that a legal high named Spice first found its way into the hearts and lungs of British teenagers. In 2009, Spice was outlawed for the first time in the UK. However, crafty science nerds found a way around this by altering the drug's chemical makeup just enough that technically it was no longer the Spice that had been banned by the government, but a new drug sold under the same brand name. Every time the government banned it, the science nerds just tweaked the formula. This game of cat and mouse continued for a number of years, with Spice drifting ever further from its original form and becoming more potent with each new recipe. Ultimately, for those in the British prison system, banning Spice only made life a whole lot worse.
Banning of a drug almost always leads to the production of more powerful and therefore more dangerous drugs. And that's exactly what we saw with Spice. The first variants of Spice had actually been tested in humans and were relatively safe. The later variants had never been tested on anyone except the people who were using them recreationally. They became their own guinea pigs, and that's why many of them have died.
In 2016, the authorities finally lost patience with Spice and all the other legal highs poisoning the nation's youth. They introduced the biggest ban of them all, the Psychoactive Substances Act. This made it an offence to produce or supply any psychoactive substance other than cigarettes, booze, or coffee. A blanket ban was enforced on Spice and all other previously legal highs, like Black Mamba, Benzo Fury, and Ivory Wave. Suddenly, head shops had lost their USP. Overnight, more than 300 businesses were forced to stop selling drugs like Spice. And within 3 months of the ban coming in, 31 head shops had shut down altogether. Sensing an opportunity, crime gangs swooped in to plug the gap. Only by this point, the Spice they were selling was a totally different beast to what it was back in 2009. The effects of the Psychoactive Substances Act are still being felt today. The government didn't win, the head shops didn't win, and the users definitely didn't win.
So the PSA was a really dumb act, one of the worst pieces of legislation ever, because it took the sale of Spice out of the head shops, where the owners were usually experienced Spice users and were recommending to their clientele safe versions of Spice. Now it's all in the back market. No one really cares about the customers. It hasn't stopped use. It's just increased the risk enormously.
It was 100 times more toxic, seriously addictive, and much more likely to ruin your life forever. And now, with head shops selling their surplus stock to criminal dealers, this grossly mutated version of Spice was flooding into the streets. Thanks to a series of bans, Spice was now in the hands of criminals, and more profitable than ever. Except now, it was no longer something that 14-year-olds got a brief buzz-off around the back of the local library. Made with chemicals sourced from underground Chinese labs, Spice is now an umbrella term for a class of turbocharged monster drugs that have blighted some British high streets more spectacularly than globalization or Jeff Bezos. There was a time when you could buy something called Spice, not just in head shops, but in friendly local newsagents, petrol stations, takeaways, and tattoo parlors. But after the government bill of 2016, Spice, in its new, more potent form, went on to replace heroin and crack as the go-to hit for many drug users living on Britain's streets. It also superseded these old reliables as the drug of choice for tabloid editors looking to terrify their aging readerships. In fairness, the evidence can be pretty grim.
I know a kid who died of it, couldn't get his heart beating more. He was beating too fast, it just went and shut down.
I know a heroin addict that's a Spice head now that takes Spice like he used to take heroin every single day of the week. He doesn't touch the heroin now. So if that heroin at a class A drug and the Spice is bringing him off that, what is in this stuff?
Spice is also causing chaos in the country's prison system.
I won't go back into strange ways and it's like a detox. But that'd be pointless. Why would it be pointless going in strange ways? There's more Spice in there than what's out on the streets.
Since 2016, Spice has been blamed for a threefold increase in non-natural deaths behind bars. There have also been countless psychotic episodes, seizures, attacks, and hospitalizations. Reports tell of bully dealers forcing samples on fellow inmates with learning difficulties, turning them into human guinea pigs.
It's everywhere. Yeah, it's everywhere. People are making thousands of pounds off that.
In jail?
In jail, yeah. And trust me, I've seen some kids in wheelchairs. And it's funny, yeah, but afterwards it's not. Just more people dying.
One prison nurse who inhaled secondhand spice smoke had to be defibrillated in the back of an ambulance. And in 2019, a prisoner in England died after setting himself on fire while high on the drug. Just how did a debilitating mystery drug get to be the hip new thing in British prisons?
Spice became popular in the UK prisons because some idiot in government decided it would be fun to test prisoners for drugs. Most prisoners were smoking cannabis. Cannabis is detectable in urine for weeks. Prisoners are not stupid, but then they hit on the idea of finding a cannabis alternative that wasn't picked up by the test kits. Hence the synthetic cannabinoids or spice started entering the prisons, and now they have utterly dominated the drug market in prison.
This is why it's becoming a homeless phenomenon, is because it numbs your senses and it makes you dull, and it makes the elements not bother you.
By now, prison workers are used to dealing with new waves of spice casualties whenever a batch of the drug finds its way inside. But for the chemicals it's made of, burning to death in the mouth of a British criminal is just the endpoint on a journey that spans the globe.
The globalization of the drug markets means it's almost impossible to stop the trade in drugs.
For all the money spent trying to police the flow of drugs around the world, today we still have offenders dying in British jail cells on a trashy chemical cooked up in labs on the outskirts of Shanghai. Of course, if the UK government hadn't banned legal highs back in 2016, there's a good chance this wouldn't be happening. To survive, many of the retailers hit hardest by the 2016 Psychoactive Substances Act switched focus from legal highs to a new trend, vaping. Now, reports suggest that certain vape shops have started selling spice-like products to customers under the counter, replacing the CBD in their weed vapes with the lab-made cannabinoids that make spice so dangerous. This is the war on drugs. Not that anyone really seems to be winning in all of this.
We'd like to congratulate drugs for winning the war on drugs.